Welcome back to 2.5 Hours. I'm Brian Becker. We're joined in our Washington, D.C. studio by three guests who will talk to us about independent third-party politics in the upcoming 2012 presidential election. We're joined first by Carla Howell. She's the executive director of the National Libertarian Party. Gail Parker, an independent candidate with the Green Party in Virginia. And Webster Tarpley, he's an independent political candidate in the past, a historian and political commentator. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course, we see that there's great dissatisfaction in the United States. There's the Occupy movement on the left. There's the Tea Party on the right. Considerable disaffection because of the high unemployment, the staggering numbers of housing foreclosures, 9 million families who were either foreclosed or threatened with foreclosure because of the housing crisis. So one would think that the dominant parties, the Republican and Democratic parties, would be blamed by the popular vote, and that would lead to great consideration of third-party candidates. Is that what's happening for the Libertarians?
There certainly is more attention than we've seen in a very long time on the Libertarian Party as a result, especially because for most Americans the number one issue is government spending. It's astronomically high, and the Libertarian Party has always been the party advocating for much smaller government.
So you think government spending is a greater issue for the electorate, say, than unemployment?
They go hand in hand. Government takes our money and supposedly creates jobs, throws it at all variety of programs, at bailouts and so forth, and this just sucks money out of the private sector. It reduces the net number of jobs because every time the government creates one job, it kills two jobs in the private sector. So government high spending and unemployment are directly linked.
Okay. Gail, I'm guessing that the Green Party has a different take on that. What causes the economic crisis? But also, is the Green Party growing because of the general discontent, disaffection? I mean, the approval ratings for Congress are at their record levels, meaning the lowest levels, and of course, a disaffection with both parties. But has that elevated the fortunes of the Green Party?
Certainly, certainly. And the entrance of Roseanne Barr into the Green Party presidential candidate and Dr. Jill Stein's entrance onto the national scene has also made a big difference. Roseanne Barr is polling very, very well, and we believe that it is a combination of the fact that we need positive solutions to the problems that we're facing today. And those positive solutions are renewable energy sources and building rail. It will grow our economy and turn the economy around. And just to show you a positive example of that, in Germany now, the unemployment rate there is 5%, about 5%, compared with 8% here. Germany is converting to renewable energy sources, and right now they're standing at about 25% renewable energy sources, and they have goals for even greater percentage of renewable sources. Right now, renewable energy sources are the #2 employer in Germany.
Well,
and soon it will be #1.
Okay. Well, let me ask you, Webster. Gail mentioned Europe, and in Europe, different parties compete in a parliamentary set of elections for the most part. So you have the Green Party with a certain percentage, the Social Democrats, the Christian Democrats, the Communists. In the United States, though, you don't see hardly any big notice of third-party candidates. Why is that?
Well, it has to do with the dominance of two Wall Street parties. In other words, as a historian, my analysis would be we're in a world economic depression of unimaginable proportions. And the problem we have with both the Republicans and the Democrats is that these are Wall Street parties. With Obama, it's very clear. We've had the government of asset strippers, of zombie bankers, of hedge fund hyenas. They've run the administration in just about every way. People who were expecting something from Obama are now bitterly disappointed. He's been a warmonger. He's been a union buster in ways that a lot of people found surprising. He's done absolutely nothing for the black community. So normally, as a failed president, he'd be going the way of Jimmy Carter. However, we then look at the other side and we see extreme reactionary Republicans, people talking about the need to assassinate Russian and Iranian nuclear scientists. Both Gingrich and Santorum have endorsed that as a policy, plus more reactionary, anti-union, anti-worker policies coming from the Republicans. Now, the problem that we have is the Libertarians and the National Greens. I would distinguish between the Virginia Independent Greens, which I think are quite a bit better. But the National Libertarians and the Greens, what do they offer? It's essentially a distilled essence of what has made the existing parties bad. In other words, the Libertarian side is likely to be a ferocious attack on the social safety net, a desire to strip the American people of their economic rights. If Gary Johnson is indeed the candidate, he was somebody who's at war with the New Deal. He's basically wants to take away your Social Security, your Medicare, your Medicaid, and so forth. 65% of the American people want to keep their economic rights that they've won under the New Deal, the New Frontier, and the Great Society. The problem then with the National Greens is a general hostility to science, technology, modern energy production. We have to remember that Germany is unfortunately a somewhat traumatized society in this regard, but China is building 25 modern nuclear reactors, and once they finish those, that will make them a very powerful country.
We're going to deal with the issue of energy sort of separately, I think, in this discussion, which is an important one. You're saying that the Greens, because of their opposition to nuclear power development, are contrary to energy. But we're gonna save
that neither of these parties can lead the country out of the current depression. That's what I'm saying.
I saw you having some sort of response to Webster's article position that you are declaring a war against the social safety net. Is it true or not true?
Big government has been a war on the social safety net of individual citizens with programs like housing and urban development, welfare programs that have entrapped people in poverty for generations. The humane solution is to get government out of the way, remove prohibitions on private charities, quit taxing people so they can take care of their friends and their family and donate to their local church and their local charity to take care of people, and also expand jobs, private sector jobs, so people can get their hands on the lowest rung of the economic ladder and be self-sufficient.
So let me just understand you, though. So there are 10 million people who are officially unemployed, or there's probably double or triple that number who are actually unemployed or underemployed. Right. What's the Libertarian Party's position on unemployment insurance? That's a key part of the social safety net. Are you for eradicating unemployment insurance benefits?
First, you remove the damage being done by government, and then you, as the free market and private charities and business growth fulfills the need, then you cut back on government. You don't first cut off the people who would be directly affected and don't have a job to turn to and don't have a family or another safety net in the private sector that they can turn to. First, you remove the damage being done by big government so that we create jobs, so we vastly expand private charity.
Go ahead,
and
Gail,
then you cut back on subsidies.
I would offer that the positive solution here is creating jobs in the private sector with infrastructure. Now, take Dr. Jill Stein's Green New Deal. Building rail and converting to renewable energy sources. It's urgently needed. And the 8% of employment, those people that are part of the 8%, recognize that we urgently need those two things to happen here in the United States, renewable energy sources and building rail. And what we need to do is to build a fire underneath the other 92%. To get them out of their complacency, to recognize that we need to build rail, and it's urgently needed in this country, and we need to convert to renewable energy sources.
Why doesn't the United States do that? Why you have the Congress dominated by the two, what you call the Wall Street parties, Republican Party and Democratic Party?
The corporate-sponsored parties. If you look at where they're
why is corporate America against rail?
Look at what is happening in the United States. If you look at this 100% subsidized asphalt out there, and you have parties that are funded by the corporate America, we need a rail party in the United States. We need a party that supports the building of rail. It is urgently needed.
Okay, Webster, let's just take this issue and first of all, on the question of rail, just help our listeners and viewers understand why in a modern industrial society, perhaps the most developed industrial society in the world.
Not anymore.
Well, I mean, it's if not anymore, I don't know what country is number one, but What's the reason within the Congress, among the Republican and Democratic parties, that the subsidy is for highway construction and for the auto industry, essentially, rather than rail, which would obviously be a big benefit for mass transit?
Well, it's a Hobson's choice, because you've got, on the one hand, the Republicans don't want to vote for anything that has any government role in it. In other words, the Republicans have become more and more libertarian in that regard. They practically joined the Austrian school under Boehner.
That's insane.
But the other problem is, of course, if you want to build anything, you've got to get the Environmental Protection Agency, you've got environmental impact studies, and all the rest of it. So the other problem is how to pay for it. On the one side, you've got Wall Street zombie banks that are bankrupt because of their derivatives. They just sit there and absorb resources, bailouts, and so forth. The U.S. budget deficit is considerable and could in some future scenario, get out of control. The problem that you have, therefore, is where do you get the credit so that you can build not just rail, but you've got to rebuild the entire interstate highway system, you've got to rebuild your electricity grids, you've got to rebuild your water and canal systems.
And where does it come from?
From the Federal Reserve. Nationalize the Federal Reserve, and this is the critical point. Nationalize the Federal Reserve, take it out of the control of these cliques of bankers, and say, Bernanke, you're going to cough up $1 trillion, a tranche of 0% federal credit, and with that, we're going to have the states issue bonds, and they're going to start building
Carla,
the rail.
jump in.
Well, first of all, you get rid of
the
the Federal Reserve altogether. It's a dangerous.
Don't nationalize it; just eliminate it.
Eliminate it altogether. But first of all, I have to correct something you said that was way off base, and that is that the Republicans are the opposite of libertarian small government. They are anything but Austrian economics. They are big government. They and the Democratic Party are equally spending us through the roof. They both have strong ties to corporate America. They both have strong ties to unions. They're for spending, no matter what the issue is. They sometimes throw around rhetoric, pretending to be for free markets, pretending they usually don't even use the term Austrian economics unless they are the rare exception. Ron Paul, who is actually libertarian amongst the GOP contenders, but the rest of them are solidly big government and for escalating spending, and they've been doing this for years. This is what they've been doing. We have one party in this country. The Democrat and Republican Party together are both for high spending. They're for government unions. They're for corporate bailouts. They're for bailing out Wall Street. They're for every program they can possibly get their hands on, with a few exceptions. But you will find on both sides of the aisle they are voting for all of these expansions
Gail,
of government.
Gail, you're trying to jump in. Go ahead. Don't hold back.
Yes. I agree with Carla on the spending for the corporate parties. We have to look at the federal debt. Right now it's $15.3 trillion. That's trillion with a T. And the budget that's just been proposed for 2013 is $3.8 trillion. And if we just look at that budget for a little bit and see what is going to happen, you know, the sequestration law kicks in at $3.6 trillion. So that tells us that right now in 2013, we're going to have a big problem with the budget that's being presented. And the $3.6 trillion is not affected by the war provision in Afghanistan. So
meaning what? Meaning that it's a supplemental. It's no longer a supplemental budget. It's part of the budget. No.
Well, the war can go on without being affected by the sequestration law.
I see. Okay, fine.
So, and when we look at military spending proposed in 2013, it's $525 billion. When we look at the energy bill, it's $27 billion. It's just a minuscule part. And the transportation, $74 billion. So clearly the big problem, the military spending is out of control. A general is now making $370,000 a year. You know, and in relation to the other segments of the budget, the military spending is just astronomical. What would make a lot more sense for us is to take the money that we're spending on wars now and put it into building jobs here in the United States, renewable energy sources, and building rail. You know,
well, let me ask you: the Green Party is for cutting the military budget, but Are you also for ending the war in Afghanistan? What's your position?
Certainly.
End it now? Bring all the troops home now?
Bring them home and put them to work in renewable energy sources, in renewing our economy through renewable energy, and building rail. Rail will help us transition from a consumable energy industry or economy to one that uses renewable energy sources. It's the smart thing to do.
Well, Webster, in the Republican debate, certainly, and you can see by the nature of the discussion, the debate or lack of debate in Congress about the military budget, there's no appetite at all for serious reductions in the military budget. In fact, the so-called curtailment of military budget is really a slowing of growth of the Pentagon budget, not an absolute reduction. Is it a major factor in the U.S. Debt problem?
It's there. I would not make so much about this entire debt question to begin with. I think this is a misplaced emphasis. This we can thank the crazed reactionaries of the Tea Party back a couple of years ago. They're the ones who started this big brouhaha about deficits and debt. Your main problem is you have an economic depression. You have a depressed economy. You've got 30 million people out of work. That's my estimate. That's real unemployment. So we're about 25 to 30% unemployed in this country. That's a depression by any count. You've got about 50 million people that are in extreme poverty. 50 million people are living on food stamps. Now, Ron Paul, the most libertarian Republican, wants to cut 2/3 out of the food stamp budget. He wants to cut about 1/3 out of the Medicaid budget. Now, that means that those 50 million people, and that's pretty much that same group, that's going to cause death among them. I mean, you can't make that kind of cut without having demographic consequences. In other words, people will die. Therefore, I think this is completely the wrong emphasis. You got to start with what we know works. The New Deal shows that a recovery program can get you out of a depression. In this case, it means nationalize the Federal Reserve, start issuing those trillion-dollar tranches of 0% century bonds, 100-year credit, where the collateral is the rail systems, the water systems, the energy systems, and so forth that you're building. A couple of other things you got to do. Tax Wall Street turnover. We need the Wall Street sales tax. Right now, Wall Street does program trading, high-frequency trading, flash trading. They can do 1 million transactions per second. They pay 0 sales tax. We buy a pair of shoes. We pay 7, 8, 10%, depending on the state that you're in. Concerning derivatives, some of them simply have to be banned. The most dangerous kinds, credit default swaps, that's what destroyed AIG. They should be banned.
But they're actually becoming more and more dominant, even though they're not going away, the credit default swaps.
But again, what I'm talking about is really 65% of the American people want something like what I say. And indeed, when you get up to a surtax on millionaires, you're up to about 80% of the American population say, yes, those super rich should pay more. Unfortunately, that won't solve it because there's not enough money there. The real money is in the Wall Street turnover.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, money is being spread out everywhere between corporations and Wall Street, but also importantly unions. And you mentioned $370,000 that generals are being paid, and that's too high. So is it as a retirement payment to teachers and superintendents in schools. There are superintendents in the public schools in the United States who are retiring on $100,000, $200,000, and even $300,000 pensions, often retiring at my age or younger, and spending 30 years on this fat salary worth millions of dollars as government employee retirees. That's just one issue. Now, also was raised here.
But the education part of the federal budget is quite low. And in terms of the, the Libertarian Party is saying the problem is teachers are too rich?
That's one of the many, many areas. We're talking about state and federal issues here. And state government is also a huge problem. And the biggest issue in state spending, overspending, is in retirement incomes of government unions.
People
but I also have to say that
this
debt, saying that the debt isn't a problem is dramatically irresponsible. Debt, not only do we pay for it directly, but the way we really pay for it is in the hidden tax of inflation. That is a direct result of printing money when we're deficit spending and driving up the debt. That means when people go to buy their groceries, it goes less far. That's why they need food stamps. This is exactly why people are often stretching every little dollar they have to make ends meet.
We see in the case of Greece that the more you cut the budget in a depression, the bigger your deficit will be. This kind of economics simply does not work. Ron Paul wants to cut $1 trillion out of the U.S. federal budget.
Spending. That's the problem.
They're cutting the Greek budget, and then in the out year they find that their deficit is even bigger. But I wanted to say, The Libertarian Party is supposedly against dictatorship and totalitarian government. The problem is their emphasis is on union busting. Now, if we look at the power relations in the society, the only forces that could ever conceivably oppose a military coup or some kind of fascist takeover are unions. And we see that Occupy Wall Street began to take off, really, back in Madison, Wisconsin a year ago. And then when the unions came down to Zuccotti Park, the CWA, the TWU, and the rest of them, that's when that got on the map. The interesting thing is that the libertarians say that they want to protect you from dictatorship, but they want to destroy the only institutions that can be institutional safeguards against this overweening power.
Go ahead, Gail.
You know, the occupiers have it right. They say that 1% of the population is taken advantage of the other 99%. And whenever I run for office, for the 99%, not for the right, not for the left, but for the 99%. What we have here is a difference of opinion about how to correct the problem. And what we are saying is Dr. Jill Stein's Green New Deal is the right way to correct the problem. It's building rail and converting to renewable energy sources. That is the big crisis that's facing our nation in the future, and it's urgently needed that we begin now to prepare for the future. And we do that by building rail, high-speed rail, trains as fast as planes. We need nationwide system of high-speed rail, and we need to convert to renewable energy sources rather than a consumable energy economy.
And that's a very big government program. Where did the Libertarians come from?
$10 billion on it in the city of Seattle is one example. But I'd like to point out here that the Libertarian Party, which is akin to the Tea Party movement, which I think it'd be nice not to name call the good citizens who identify themselves as Tea Party. But the Libertarians, Tea Party, Ron Paul, one of the few exceptions within the GOP, and our Libertarian candidates, which includes former Governor Gary Johnson of New Mexico, we are for shrinking government, and this includes across the board. It includes government unions, it includes military spending, it includes bailing out Wall Street and corporate handouts and subsidies.
What about rail? What about building huge mass transit, which would obviously be a big government project?
Well, you have to look at places like Seattle where they wasted $10 billion on a project that didn't work, or Massachusetts where the MBTA, the metro system in Boston, is just a disaster of waste, it's been known as a pork and patronage haven, and amongst Massachusetts government agencies, that's saying a lot because they basically all are, and it's one of
you have some skeptical faces, so I'll let them jump in.
You had people retiring at age 42, on a full pension out of the Massachusetts transit system. So it's as vulnerable to waste and abuse as any other government program.
Go ahead, Gail.
I would beg to differ with you there, Carla and Brian, on this. You know, for the most part, now not in all, but for the most part, rail is privately owned and operated for a profit. It's part of the private sector. Now, we do have rail systems, and we need feeder systems in our population centers that will feed into the high-speed rail nationwide. That's the vision that we have for our country.
So, Green Party is for a private sector rail system?
Our Green Party of Virginia, Independent Green Party of Virginia, is certainly for a private sector funding of rail, high-speed rail.
What if the private sector doesn't want to? I mean, if it's an imperative need, why should the government not jump in and assume it as a primary responsibility?
You look at the corporate parties that are corporate-sponsored parties that are in power now. Our vision for our country is privately owned and operated in the ideal sense. But we recognize that it will take a public-private consortium to make this happen, just as they have done in the past, and we can make it happen very quickly, which we need to do. We need to build rail now, as they say in California, at warp speed, and we can do that. The rail, even if we use the traditional rail, it uses energy so much more efficiently, and it doesn't have to be subsidized. If you talk about subsidy, what we're seeing out here, this asphalt and concrete out here, is 100% subsidized by taxpayers' dollars. Rail is not in most of the countries, like most of the systems. For example, the metro system is 80% funded by user fees.
Yeah,
That's good.
it's also doesn't run very well right now because it's on single tracking. We have 60 seconds
the
before the
Republican
break,
Congress
Webster.
wouldn't put money into it for all those years. The big question is how can you pay for these things? Rail is good, but right now the Bernanke Fed gives a 0% loan. As long as you're a zombie bank or a hedge fund hyena or an asset stripper like Mitt Romney, you get 0% credit. But if you're productive, if you're doing infrastructure or any kind of agriculture, mining, anything that produces a tangible physical product, the Federal Reserve is not there for you. It's time to change that. In other words, to reverse those priorities. Instead of subsidizing speculation and financial swindles and derivatives, direct that credit preferentially into productive activity, into manufacturing, mining, agriculture, and indeed infrastructure building. Then you get a recovery. Unfortunately, the problem with the constant stress on renewable energy is that those renewables have to be subsidized. They're not economical, at least at the current price of oil. The solar cell, the windmill, these are fine for specialty uses, but not for your base load capacity.
Gail, if you hold that
work.
thought, I think we're going to take a short break because that's the end of our first segment. We are taking a short break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the second segment of 2 half hours. It's Brian Becker here. We're joined in our Washington, D.C. studio by Carla Howell. She's the executive director of the National Libertarian Party. Gail Parker, an independent candidate for the Green Party, and Webster Tarpley, formerly an independent candidate, a historian, political commentator. In this segment, we're going to focus on the big issues that have been raised by the Occupy movement, and specifically that of income inequality and its impact on both the American people and on the political process. And we also want to discuss the U.S. foreign policy. The Republicans and the Democrats have monopolized that foreign policy for the past 2 centuries. We're going to hear what would the third parties do if they were in power. So, Carla, first of all, Libertarian, well, Gail, let me come back to you. You wanted to jump in before we ended that second segment.
A burning point is that we need to put the people back to work. And when we talk about subsidies for rail, that is just absolutely ludicrous, because when you look at the budget, there's only $4 billion in the 2013 budget for rail. There's $78 billion in there for the rest of the asphalt. Rail does not get subsidized. If you want subsidies, you talk about the roads out there. That is being subsidized, not rail, and certainly not energy.
Okay, we're going to come back again. I think we've touched a lot on the issue of energy and rail, and it's an important issue, a dominant issue perhaps for many people. But I want to go to the issue that's been raised since September 17th with the Occupy movement, the beginning of the Occupy movement in Zuccotti Park, Lower Manhattan, the issue of the 1% and the 99%. Joseph Stiglitz, the Nobel prize-winning economist, said that this is a government of the 1%, by the 1%, for the 1%. In other words, a plutocracy of sorts. Does the Libertarian Party see it that way?
Well, it's probably more like about 20%. The unions, the corporations, the government employees who profit from government.
So you put government employees, many of them
Absolutely.
make $40,000, and you're talking about people who are making
the average
hundreds
government
of millions.
employee makes higher wages. They get much better benefits, vacation, sick time, and so forth. And above all, they get pensions that are often worth 3 to 10 times what the average private sector worker gets. So it's
income
dramatic
inequality. So you think it's government workers are part of the problem?
The real
in terms of
haves and
income
have-nots in
inequality?
this society is the private sector versus the government sector workers. That's where the biggest inequality is and the most pervasive, especially if you add it up in total dollars. So that's when you talk about the majority, what the majority of Americans want is less government, lower government spending, lower taxes, and less government intrusion into their lives. Every poll in the last 12 years has shown that a solid majority of Americans want that, yet the Democrats and Republicans in Congress and in state legislatures are doing the opposite. They're spending more and taxing more.
But wait,
Go ahead,
this is now patently absurd, that we're going to say that union members and government workers are part of the super rich financier oligarchy who dominate this country? Are they up there with Jamie Dimon
no, you didn't hear
and
what I said.
Blankfein?
We're talking about inequality and the haves and have-nots. If you look at a painter who you would hire to paint your house versus someone working on a government project who's a union painter, especially if he's a government employee.
But this is chicken feed.
They're getting, oh no, it adds up to many, it adds up to trillions of dollars. No, we're talking trillions of dollars in excess payments to government unions and government contractors beyond what they would get in the private sector, and this is depressing
I would call this a willful attempt to muddy the waters with a fake sociology.
This is widely agreed upon by economists since the beginning of time.
The other thing is
more
what
government
the polls
means
show.
less employment.
The polls show, most recently, 65 to 70% of Americans say, I want to keep my Social Security, I want to keep my Medicare, hands off my benefits, New Deal reforms stay.
Now, I would agree with you that
Libertarians
those
should probably go back to Austria.
Those should be cut the last because what we need to do is first restore the private sector, restore jobs before letting those programs by getting government out of the way with less regulation, with less spending.
So we have a depression caused by deregulation and privatization.
No, we have a
and the
depression.
answer now is to increase the deregulation and privatization.
That's exactly, you have it exactly
so more
180
of the
degrees
into this case.
wrong. What's happening in Greece, what's happening in the United States, what's happening across the world is government intervention, government spending, government control is what is depressing the economies across the world.
Well, go ahead.
Occupy Wall Street gets at least one thing right, that the enemy is not government and not science and technology. It is the Wall Street financier oligarchy. It's a paper-thin stratum of super-rich exploiters, right? And again, it's the people who dominate these New York banks.
Well, some people in the Occupy movement are saying that the bank's wealth is ill-begotten wealth, that it's based on fraud, it's based on
derivatives. We have several quadrillion dollars, of derivatives.
But recognizing that the banks play a dominant role in the economy, the private banks, the biggest banks, and they play a dominant role in the political process in terms of their impact on the Republican and Democratic Party. There are some in the Occupy movement who say that the banks themselves should be nationalized, that they should be seized, that the government should take over the issue.
The critical issue is the derivatives. In other words, you've got the credit default swaps that destroyed AIG, the collateralized debt obligations that destroyed Bear and Lehman and really all the others. Those have to be banned. Even Blankfein at the end of his Senate, testimony. No, this is deregulation.
No, it is not. There's never real deregulation.
Point of history. Between 1936 and 1982, under the New Deal Commodity Exchange Act, derivatives were illegal. It was deregulation under Reagan and then under Bush and under Clinton as well that gave us this derivatives plague. That is the thing that takes a relatively manageable downturn in housing and makes it into a world financial cataclysm.
So-called deregulation is always just an extension and a creation of more regulations. There's never real deregulation.
Well, one of the things that was deregulated or changed or eliminated was the Glass-Steagall Act in the 1990s during the Clinton administration, which, as a consequence of the Depression in the 1930s, disallowed banks, commercial banks, from being investment banks, from being able to take people's money and use that money to basically gamble with it in stocks or, in this case, with derivatives.
And that's a very fine thing.
And is the Libertarian Party for allowing the banks to just have free reign? In other words, you're for the elimination of Glass-Steagall?
We're for the elimination of just about every regulation since 1916
that
has created, I'm talking about financial regulations, that have resulted in the devaluation of the dollar, which has resulted in massive growth of government, higher taxes, and fewer jobs. If
you're for a strong dollar?
Absolutely. And the only way we can do that is...
the U.S. government in both... Here we have the Chinese prime minister coming, or the prime minister to be coming to the United States, and both parties are sort of agitating against China for not lowering its currency rate. In other words, or raising its currency rate, which would lower the value of the dollar, meaning American goods would be more affordable overseas. But you're for a stronger dollar, which would make American goods more expensive overseas.
The Libertarian Party is for free trade in currency. We should allow trade by gold, by barter, by any other commodity. It shouldn't be controlled in China, and it shouldn't be controlled here. You're comparing two governments who impose massive controls on the currency, as do virtually every government in the world. And this is what it basically serves to do is allow these governments to spend more, devaluing their own currency, and effectively stealing from the people who earn that money.
Let me ask all of you this question. We see unfolding the drama in Europe, in the European economic crisis, the sovereign debt crisis, which undoubtedly will have an impact on the global economy and the U.S. economy, and perhaps the U.S. elections coming up, including the fate of your own parties. Now, the people in Greece are in the streets. They're rioting, they're rebelling. There's been a 20% reduction in the minimum wage. You've seen working people and middle-class families' lifestyles or quality of life diminish, economically speaking, by 20 to 30% in the past 6 months. That's all in order to provide collateral to pay private banks in Europe. What's the Libertarian Party's solution in those kind of cases? Is it austerity? Is the opposite of government spending is austerity, no?
Well, the opposite of government spending is free trade and empowering and enriching the private sector to earn more, to give more to charity, to take care of families, to create jobs, to empower small businesses. This is where real wealth is created. Government cannot create wealth. It can only destroy wealth.
But do you support or oppose the austerity plan in Greece?
I oppose the word austerity. They need to cut government spending. A lot of the
You're
people
for the
over
cutbacks in Greece.
They need to dramatically cut government spending and empower the private sector, which has been largely usurped by big government in Greece.
We would have to be clear that the plight of Europe, first of all, derives from financial warfare using credit default swaps that I've already referred to. The U.S. and the British, seeing the dollar in danger of collapsing, have decided to dump the depression into Europe. It's a kind of financial warfare, beggar my neighbor, export the depression to Europe, using the bond issues of these smaller countries. Now we have the neoliberal economic policies, drastic, savage, brutal austerity being visited on many of the countries in Europe. Now, there's no end to that. And as I said before, those methods will never balance a budget. You cannot do that in a depression. The more you cut, the bigger the deficit gets. What Greece obviously needs at this point is a debt moratorium. Simply follow on the road of Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, 35 countries around the world at different times have said, we can't pay, we're stopping the payments, we'll negotiate with you. They should not leave the euro.
You're calling brutal austerity. I'm sorry, you're filibustering here.
They should stay in it.
You're calling brutal austerity, telling government employees they have to work beyond age 52.
No.
That's brutal austerity.
It's a policy of genocide
what's going
against
on
the
over
Greek
there.
people.
But that's what's going on. Those are some of the cuts that they're actually talking about in Greece. These people are retiring at age 52.
I'm delighted to see the Libertarian delegate lining up with the International Monetary Fund, the European Central Bank, and the rest of these austerity
Go ahead, Gail. Why don't you jump in?
Okay. Well, we're more concerned about what's happening right here. We believe that the procedures that have been put in place in Greece are going to be successful, and that the financial downturn is going to be stopped there. So we're looking and more concerned about what's actually going on here in the United States on our soil. And where we kind of differ about is what is the proper solution. We believe that's putting people back to work, to jobs, and we want everybody to have good salaries. We don't care how much they make as long as we have everybody is able to enjoy a good, prosperous life and a good quality of life free of pollution and have clean air and clean water. And we believe that the best way to do that is to convert to renewable energy sources versus a consumable energy sources. And the way we get to that is to build rail.
I understand, but I want to go back now in our second part of our second segment and talk about where your parties and where the independent candidates stand on some of the basic foreign policy issues and where they stand in contrast to the Republicans and Democrats. Now, when President Obama came into office in January 2009, there was a wave of euphoria, optimism that not only was Bush leaving, but the Bush era was ending, which meant that the war in Iraq would end, the occupation of Afghanistan would end, that there would be a general kind of peace that would start to replace the endless war of the Bush era. And yet the war in Afghanistan expanded. Of course, the U.S. combat troops have left Iraq, but there's a very large contingent of private security. And now the danger of a new possible major conflagration with Iran. Where does the Libertarian Party and the Green Party and the other independent parties, or Webster, your own intervention on that, regarding foreign policy. Why is the Obama administration's foreign policy so much like the Bush administration's foreign policy?
Good question, and I think it's, as I say, the Democrat and Republican parties are virtually the same. If you were to take the voting record of a random Congress person in the Republican or Democrat parties, white out their name, white out their party, and ask even a seasoned political activist, which is a Democrat and which is a Republican, they won't be able to tell you unless they happen to be on the legislative staff and happen to have intimate knowledge of a particular bills. By and large, they vote the same. They're for foreign intervention, just as Obama has proven, as you have said. They're for sanctions, which Obama has now imposed on Iran, which is exactly what led up to the Iraqi war and which caused the death of over 100,000 innocent civilians in that country. They're both for corporate bailouts. They're both for unions and enriching government unions. They are virtually the same. The Libertarian Party has always been a party that has been very explicitly for a non-interventionist foreign policy. Yes, we need a small military defense that defends our soil and our shores, but not this military.
What should the military budget be? Right now we see the real military budget is not 600+ billion. It's actually, when you take all the other parts of the budget together, the real budget's closer to $1 trillion.
Correct.
What would the Libertarian Party do? And what about the foreign military bases, 900 of them around the world?
Gary Johnson, one of our Libertarian candidates, Ron Paul, the Libertarian in the GOP, and the Libertarian Party itself, for years have called for dramatic reductions in military spending, bringing our troops home from over 130 countries around the world where we have bases, where we are engaged, where we need to get out, quit meddling with foreign affairs, and simply mind our own business, defend our shores. What we need to do is have trade with other countries. That is the precursor to peace. Sanctions and hostility are the precursor to war. Free trade is the precursor to peace, and that's what the Libertarian Party calls for.
Gail, I know you want to focus on U.S. and on rail and renewable energy, but I want to ask you where the Green Party or the Independent Green Party stands on those issues, on Afghanistan, on Iran, the military bases, and the military budget.
Oh, Brian, we are for bringing the troops home. In fact, we believe that we can cut the military spending budget by 90%, and still we would be spending more money than any other nation in the world. We need to cut the budget. And the biggest difference between the Green Party and the two major corporate-sponsored parties is the fact that we're a national party. We have Green parties all over the world, and that would be a tremendous advantage for someone in a national position to be able to talk with some members of their own party in foreign countries, and that's a big, big plus for the Green parties. But we are thoroughly behind Dr. Jill Stein's Green New Deal, and that is, once again, to build renewable energy sources and build rail. It's a key structure.
I think we have that part. I'm just trying to stay focused, though, on the issue of foreign policy. I want to ask you, Gail, and I want to ask the other people here, too, what's driving this sort of policy or strategy of what seems to be endless war or possibly new wars at every turn, and what's driving the current crisis in the Persian-Arabian Gulf?
The crisis in Wall Street means that the rate of looting, the rate of primitive exploitation or primitive accumulation against all governments in the world has to be increased. So therefore there's an attempt to use color revolutions, people power coups of the CIA to overthrow the governments across the Arab world. There's an attempted color revolution in Moscow. They're attempting to destabilize China, and so forth. These policies come from Wall Street. Wall Street, once again, is the enemy. I think what the American people are interested in would be a return to something like the good neighbor policy under Roosevelt. That would mean Obama started a war with Pakistan that really was not there before, with his drones and so forth. It would be important to put that to an end. Obama did the attack on Libya without reference to Congress in any way. If Ron Paul were serious about what he says, he would have brought in articles of impeachment against Obama for what Obama did in Libya. And the fact that Ron Paul has not done that makes me wonder about how serious he is. Right now, the question is Iran. We have Secretary of Defense Panetta with tremendous irresponsibility, I think, saying the United States shares a common cause with Israel, meaning in practice that if Israel decides to attack Iran, the United States will be dragged into a ruinous, disastrous war as the tail on the Israeli kite. And I can't see how that's going to be acceptable. In terms of the Pentagon budget, you have to proceed through reconversion. In other words, you can't just shut down all the aerospace assembly lines and related things. You've got to reconvert those to peaceful production, to aerospace, to reviving a peaceful civilian space program, and so forth. As far as the foreign bases go, there you've got to begin drawing them down, but also that's got to be done carefully, because, for example, if you simply pile everybody out of South Korea from one day to the next, you might get some consequences that really you don't want to find out about. Concerning Ron Paul, one last thing.
One last thing, then we're going to go to Gail.
The net effect of Ron Paul in the Republican primaries has been to help Romney, who is one of the biggest warmongers. Romney says he wants 100,000 troops. The effect of Ron Paul is that he locks up some anti-Romney votes. And if you look at what Ron Paul does, he's always attacking Santorum and Gingrich, never Romney. Very strange. He's for peace, but he lets the biggest warmonger get a pass.
Let Gail jump in quickly, and then we'll go to you, Carla.
Another distinction between the Green Party and the other corporate-funded parties, we are thoroughly behind stopping those illegal arms sales. It creates a warring environment overseas, and we need to stop that.
Okay.
So we're...
That's an important issue.
Now,
Carla, go ahead.
First of all, excuse me, I couldn't agree more in your criticisms of Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney is big government. He's for an intervention and meddling. He's for government spending at every opportunity. Ron Paul, if he was to bring in the issue of impeachment every time the president or the Congress violated the Constitution, he wouldn't have time to eat, because that's with the majority of what they do. It violates Article Section 1 of the Constitution, which calls for very limited government, and it violates the Constitution. The politicians, the Democrat and Republican politicians in Washington, D.C., violate that all the time.
I don't know. He brings a lot of bills. Henry Gonzalez put in
none of your
impeachment against
supporters
Bush
in Congress
the Elder.
Pushed that particular one either, but he has pointed out more vocally than anyone else that it was a violation.
He's the only candidate who's in the House of Representatives right now is Ron Paul. So he's somebody who could start an impeachment.
Webster raised the issue about the U.S.-Israeli position. We see very openly the Israeli government leaders, Netanyahu and others, speaking openly about the prospect or possibility of a military assault against Iran, pretextually around the issue of Iran's supposed nuclear program or military nuclear program, which Iran denies. The United States provides Israel with the largest aid package of any government in the world. Egypt is second, I believe. What's your position on Israel, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and the U.S.-Israeli relationship?
Like with every foreign country, we should be encouraging free trade, not war, not military spending, not foreign aid.
What about West Bank settlements?
We need to quit subsidizing.
West Bank settlements.
Need to
the
withdraw.
Obama administration came in and said the top priority was to stop the expansion of Israeli settlements in Palestinian Arab land in the West Bank, and yet they've continued. What's your position on that?
We need to stay out of these conflicts and withdraw support not only for Israel, but for all the Arab countries in the Middle East who we have been sending foreign aid to, military aid, military training, weapons. We have been subsidizing all of these countries in the Middle East, including Israel. We need to withdraw from all of it and disentangle ourselves from this conflict as fast as we possibly can.
Gail,
we're for peace. We need peace. The free enterprise system does not thrive in wartime. We need peace so that we can put our people to work, create jobs, get back to a...
Regarding Palestine, though, how does that happen? What's the position of the Green Party on Palestine?
Well, we support withdrawing all of these illegal arms sales. That would do more from not only from us, but also from Russia and China. If the major powers were to stop selling arms abroad, we would have peace, and the people and the Palestinians and Israelis could sit down and work it out. We don't need to be meddling overseas and creating a warring environment. It's just not right. We need to start righting some wrongs, and the first thing we need to do that is stop our illegal arms sales.
Webster, where do you think things are going with Iran? Because we see that that's becoming a dominant issue. In Congress, there's one resolution after another against Iran, one more hawkish than the other. The Obama administration has imposed very severe economic sanctions. So has the EU. On the other hand, China, Russia, India, seem to be trying to find ways to defy the economic sanctions, are not, don't want Iran to be economically isolated. Where's that going?
And let me just say, the Green Party, when the Green Party gets into power, as, for example, Germany, they've acted as warmongers. Joschka Fischer was the big organizer of the attack on Iraq, and the Green Party in Germany has supported every NATO military adventure since. I think a real American president would at this point issue an ultimatum to Israel saying, stop it, back off, you'll be on your own, your military and other aid will be cut, don't do it. We're not going to be dragged into a ruinous war because of the short-term demagogic needs of somebody like Netanyahu. The obvious conflict, I think, is it's with the Israelis, but it's also, if the dollar begins to collapse, there's one way to prop up the dollar, which is to radically raise the price of oil. It's been done in 1973 and again in 1979.
And that's because international oil is sold with
denominated in dollars. So I think there's a group in Wall Street that says if the dollar begins to go, if we get a massive panic exit from the dollar, which we could get any day of the week now, then start a war in the Gulf, cut off the tanker traffic, get the price of oil up to $500 a barrel, and then you've stabilized the dollar, at least for a short time. So that's a path to war, quite apart from the
Carla's laughing at your comments. Why?
We shouldn't be controlling the price of oil. We shouldn't be controlling the price of currencies. We need to
No, this would be done by the market.
Well, the market, that's fine if it's done by the market. But the reason, by the way, the price of oil keeps going up against the dollar is because of the devaluation of the dollar, not because the actual rise in the price of oil, which has been relatively stable, when you look at its actual cost when purchased in gold. So we need to get out of they are related. The manipulation of the currency is related to government spending because that's how they get away with the astronomical government spending that's going on today. We need to cut government spending. I agree with your position on the military. We need to, and that is the position of the Libertarian Party. We need far less foreign intervention, far less foreign aid, and we need to just quit. We need to mind our own business. These were the policies of Jefferson and Washington that kept us out of the French Revolution.
The Libertarian, there's two kinds of anti-intervention and anti-war position. There's the left position and there's the right position. Is the Libertarian position hearkening back to the sort of non-intervention position of the Republican Party in the 1930s, the so-called isolationists who wanted to stay out of World War II and said, Europe, Nazism, none of our business? Is that, is that part of that tradition?
The Republicans and Democrats switch. Whenever a Republican president is in power, the Democrats are against war. When a Democrat is the president, the Republicans are against war. And Roosevelt was a Democrat. So they conveniently switch, and then when the war goes bad, as they almost always do, they blame it on the other party, even if their own party started the war, as JFK did in the case of Vietnam. So they've always been for war. They line up in blocks against particular bills to create some competition, but more so a pretense of competition. In reality, they're both very tightly linked to the Beltway bandits around Washington, D.C., the military-industrial complex, and they want war. They want military intervention. Bottom line is they want to keep that spending going. And that is what is leading to tremendous conflicts.
So war is good business. People are profiting from war.
It's good business, and it's harmful not only to the countries that are affected directly by it, but it's harmful to the United States, to our dollar, to our servicemen who are killed or who are injured in these wars, who are traumatized for life in many cases. It's harmful to small businesses that need to create jobs because it depletes our wealth. There's all kinds of damage that results, and we need to pull back from these foreign interventions.
We have 2 minutes. We have 2 minutes, and I'm going to ask the final question and give you all a shot at it. After World War II, we had the Korean War, then the Vietnam War. We had the intervention in Santo Domingo. We had later the intervention in Lebanon. We had the intervention in Panama. We had the Gulf War in 1991. We had the bombing of Yugoslavia in 1999. Another Gulf War, another Iraq War in 2003. Before that was Afghanistan. Now, I mean, that's a period of 60 or 70 years of war, war, war. And obviously, as you said, there's profit to be made from war. Who are the forces within the U.S. political establishment that are driving that kind of policy, which seems to be institutionalized? I'm going to each of you for 20 seconds.
It comes from Wall Street, obviously. It's Wall Street imperialist circles. Wall Street makes these policies. The interface between Wall Street, the State Department, the CIA, and the other government institutions is the locus where aggression is spawned. Concerning your question before, Ron Paul always talks about how much he loves Robert Taft, Mr. Republican, who's exactly the kind of isolationist who was willing to ignore the Hitler problem and all the rest of it at that time. So it's a very, very peculiar kind of phenomenon.
Who are the forces in the political establishment driving the war drive?
Well, part of it is the corporate-funded political parties, and part of it is our government, the Defense Security Assistance Agency. They're tasked with monitoring the arms sales and enforcing the Arms Export Control Act, and they're falling down in that area. But I want to correct one thing. The Green Party was founded on nonviolent principles. Patrick Kelly was the founder of the Green Party in Germany, and they were firmly based on nonviolence and peace.
Until they got into power.
Until they got into power. You have the final word,
It's the military-industrial complex, defense contractors. It's the Democrat and Republican politicians and their parties that are for intervention. The Libertarian Party is for peace, for shrinking government, for cutting taxes, and for allowing the private sector to thrive. I think
we're going to leave it at that. This concludes this episode of 2.5 Hours. Thank you, Webster Tarpley, Gail Parker, Carla Howell. We've been discussing the independents' role in the 2012 election. We'll see you next time.